Ferrari is about to do something that sounds backwards. For months, this team has been chasing Mercedes, race after race, upgrade after upgrade, clawing back tenths, wherever it could find them, sending new parts to the track almost every other weekend, just to stay in touching distance. And now, right as that chase has finally closed to a manageable distance, Ferrari is preparing to strip away one of the very features that got them this close. Not a rival's weapon, not a regulation change forced on them from outside, the kind of thing every team has to absorb whether they like it or not. This is their own invention, something Ferrari's engineers built and pioneered themselves, something other teams have reportedly tried to copy. And now Ferrari is planning to walk away from it, voluntarily, for at least one weekend. The question worth sitting with before anything else, before a single number or acronym enters this story: why would a championship-hungry team deliberately make its car less sophisticated at the exact moment it can least afford to slow down? Here is the number that makes this stranger than it first sounds. Lewis Hamilton sits just 32 points off the championship lead heading into the Belgian Grand Prix. 32 points, with more than half the season still to run, and with Ferrari having just delivered its strongest weekend of the year. That is not the kind of gap you protect by removing parts from the car. That is the kind of gap you close by adding performance, by pushing every possible upgrade through the factory doors in Maranello as fast as it can physically be built and shipped. So why would the team choose this exact weekend, at this exact circuit, to take something away instead of simply bolting something new on top of what already works? The answer, it turns out, depends entirely on where you're standing when you ask the question. And Spa-Francorchamps, it turns out, is not a normal place to be asking it. To understand why, you first have to understand what just happened at the very top of the championship table. Kimi Antonelli, the 19-year-old Mercedes rookie who has led the standings for most of this season, arrived at Silverstone looking close to untouchable, fast in practice, fast in the sprint. The kind of form that made a home win for Lewis Hamilton feels almost secondary to the bigger story unfolding around him. Then, mid-race, a wheel shield failure sent his car skating off the circuit more than once. A 5-second penalty for exceeding track limits followed soon after, and Antonelli walked away from the British Grand Prix with nothing. 0 points, from a position that had looked, for most of the weekend, like a likely win. His championship lead, which had stretched out to a far more comfortable margin only weeks earlier, was cut down to 25 points in a single chaotic afternoon. A driver who looked practically unbeatable a month ago suddenly looks human, fallible, capable of losing a race weekend to something as small as a broken wheel shield. And every team behind him, Ferrari very much included, has quietly recalculated what's possible because of it. So now name the actual piece of hardware sitting at the center of this decision. It's called the flick-tail mode exhaust flap, an aerodynamic solution Ferrari pioneered on this year's car and has leaned on for the majority of the season. Reportedly, technical director Loic Serra is preparing to remove it entirely for the trip to Belgium, sacrificing it for the first time all year. That single sentence carries more weight than it appears to at first glance. Because this isn't a minor trim piece or a cosmetic tweak bolted on for marginal gains. It's a part the team has effectively built its identity around this season, something the paddock has come to associate with Ferrari's whole approach to this car. Before you can understand why giving it up matters, though, you have to understand what the part is actually doing to the car in the first place, and why anyone would build something this central to a season-long strategy only to abandon it at the exact moment the title fight tightens. Here is what the flap actually does. It works by channeling hot exhaust gases directly onto the underside of the rear wing, and that redirection generates real, measurable downforce through the corners. Downforce a car can lean on to carry more speed through a bend without losing grip. It has been one of the central reasons the SF26 has performed so well in medium and high downforce corners all year, the kind of corners that make up the majority of a typical Formula One weekend, from Barcelona to Silverstone to almost everywhere else on the calendar. Rivals have reportedly tried to copy elements of Ferrari's wing philosophy since it first appeared earlier this season, which tells you a great deal about how much value the wider paddock believes is locked inside this one component. Removing it, then, is not a small or symbolic sacrifice. It's giving up a genuine, proven competitive advantage, on purpose, in the middle of the tightest title fight this team has had in years. Now for the number underneath the sacrifice. Blanking off that exhaust exit reportedly costs Ferrari as much as 7 horsepower. 7 horsepower, traded away in exchange for less aerodynamic drag through Spa's punishing straights, where raw top speed matters more than almost anywhere else on the entire calendar. On paper, that trade sounds close to irrational. Give up power to chase speed, weaken one number to strengthen another. It only starts to make sense once you understand exactly what kind of circuit Ferrari is walking into this weekend, and why a car built around cornering efficiency can suddenly become a genuine liability the moment the layout of the track changes underneath it. Here's the deeper layer sitting beneath all of it. This was never really about one flap or one wing in insulation. It's about a fundamental mismatch between how the SF26 was designed to behave and what Spa-Francorchamps actually demands from a Formula One car. The straights here, from the plunge out of La Source through Eau Rouge and Raidillon, and on up the Kemmel Straight toward Les Combes, run long enough that any extra drag stops being a rounding error and starts becoming a genuine, race-deciding lap time problem. Reportedly, Formula One has selected 5 separate straight-mode activation zones for this year's race weekend, more than almost any other event on the calendar, which only raises the stakes on getting this configuration exactly right before a single lap has even been driven. Mercedes, meanwhile, is understood to hold a real structural advantage in energy management on circuits shaped like this one, a strength that has little to do with any single component and everything to do with how the W17 was engineered from the ground up around exactly this kind of demand. That is precisely why Ferrari cannot afford to show up underpowered this weekend, whatever the short-term cost to its usual strengths elsewhere on the calendar. It would be easy to tell this story as a clean gamble that's guaranteed to pay off. It isn't, and Ferrari's own drivers have said as much publicly, which is worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as routine caution. Charles Leclerc has been notably more measured than the optimistic framing coming out of Maranello, pointing out that even the best possible version of these new parts is unlikely to hand Ferrari the 3 or 4 tenths per lap the team is actually missing to the genuine front-runners. And there's a second, entirely separate problem hanging over the whole plan: the weather. Spa's forecast heading into the weekend is unsettled, with cooler temperatures and a real threat of rain rolling through the Ardennes forest at some point across the 3 days. If wet conditions arrive, Ferrari may be forced back into a more conservative, higher downforce setup regardless of what's been carefully prepared in the factory, which would undercut the entire low-drag strategy the team has spent weeks building toward. A car engineered specifically for a dry, high-speed weekend can quietly become the wrong car within a single hour if the sky over Spa decides not to cooperate with the plan. There's also history working against Ferrari here, and it's worth being honest about it, rather than smoothing it over for the sake of a cleaner story. The team hasn't won at Spa since 2019, when Leclerc took his first career victory there in what was, at the time, treated as the arrival of a new era. In each of the 4 editions since, the best Ferrari has managed is 3rd place, race after race, without ever getting back to the top step. That's not a small footnote for a team that builds its cars in Italy and considers itself among the sport's great historic institutions. Hamilton, on the other hand, arrives as something close to a specialist at this exact track, with 5 career wins at Spa across his long career, only one shy of Michael Schumacher's all-time record of 6 victories there. So this weekend carries 2 competing threads running through it at once. A team trying to break a stubborn losing streak at a circuit that has quietly resisted it for years, and a driver who might personally be the best-suited man on the entire grid to finally end it, if the car underneath him actually cooperates. It's worth remembering, too, that Ferrari's development budget this season hasn't been unlimited or evenly spread across the calendar. A significant share of it went early, into the original concept of the SF26, under a deliberately conservative philosophy that froze much of the car's core design before the season had really begun, specifically so engineers could properly evaluate what they'd built before committing to bigger, riskier changes later on. That decision is part of why the updates arriving now, at Spa, are being described as smaller in scale and increasingly tailored to individual circuits, rather than the kind of sweeping, season-defining leap Ferrari fans might be hoping for. There's also a second, quieter storyline running underneath the aerodynamics entirely. Ferrari reportedly qualifies for additional in-season engine development tokens this year, after being assessed by the FIA as sitting somewhere between 6 and 8% off the performance benchmark set by the sport's current standard bearer. Those tokens matter beyond the immediate weekend, because they represent a second avenue of catching up that has nothing to do with wings or exhaust flaps at all, and everything to do with the power unit sitting behind the driver. Underneath all of the wings and exhaust flaps sits something that isn't really about hardware at all. Hamilton is 40 years old, in his second season wearing red, chasing a record 8th world title that has slipped past him every single year since he first arrived at Ferrari. He has spent time this year inside Maranello directly, sitting in meetings with the team's leadership and technical staff, pushing personally for exactly these kinds of changes to the car rather than waiting quietly for engineers to arrive at them on their own. He spoke openly about not wanting to repeat the fate of other great drivers who wore red without ever winning a championship in it, naming that fear plainly rather than dancing around it in the usual careful, diplomatic driver language. That's the emotional frame sitting underneath every single technical decision this team is making right now. An aging 7-time champion, working against a closing window, aware that time is not unlimited, sits on one side of this story. A 19-year-old rookie championship leader who just showed, for the first time all season, that the pressure can genuinely get to him, sits on the other. Everything happening in the garage this weekend is being shaped by both of those pressures at once. It also explains why Hamilton has been unusually candid about the scale of the task in front of him, describing this period of his career in blunt terms, rather than the polished, guarded language drivers often default to in front of cameras. He talked about looking at Ferrari's history over the last 20 years, and seeing a list of genuinely exceptional drivers who came through Maranello and left without a championship to show for it, and about refusing, in his own words, to let that become his story too. That kind of statement doesn't happen by accident. It reflects a driver who understands exactly how much time he doesn't have left at the top of the sport, sitting across a garage from a teenager who, until Silverstone, looked like he might simply outlast everyone else's ambitions through sheer, uninterrupted consistency. Antonelli's stumble hasn't erased that threat. It has only opened a door that Hamilton, at 40, knows might not open twice. So here's where the numbers actually stand, heading into Belgium, as concretely as they can be stated. Antonelli leads the Drivers' Championship with 179 points. Russell sits second on 154, 25 points behind his own teammate. Hamilton is third on 147, 32 points off the top. Leclerc has climbed to fourth with 108, boosted directly by his first win of the season at Silverstone. In the constructors' standings, Mercedes still leads Ferrari by a wide margin, even after Ferrari's strongest weekend of the year to date, a reminder of just how much ground still separates the two teams, despite the momentum shift. What's actually confirmed in this story is narrower than the headlines around it suggest. It's confirmed that Ferrari is preparing to remove the flick-tail mode exhaust for Belgium. It's confirmed that Antonelli's lead was cut to 25 points at Silverstone, and that Hamilton now sits 32 points back, with real momentum behind him. What remains genuinely speculative is almost everything about the payoff itself, whether the reworked Macarena rear wing, said by some sources to be worth as much as 11 kilometers per hour, and by others closer to just 3, actually makes it onto the car this weekend at all, since Ferrari itself has said its arrival depends more on production timing than on track performance data. Whether any of it survives contact with a Belgian sky that refuses to commit to dry or wet. What happens at Spa won't settle the championship on its own. But it will answer something more immediate and more revealing: whether Ferrari actually built the car it believes it built, or whether Mercedes' advantage runs deeper than a single exhaust flap can fix. That answer is waiting on the other side of this weekend, and it leads straight into Hungary, where Ferrari will find out fast whether whatever they learn at Spa was ever worth the gamble at all. Hungary is a very different kind of test, tighter, slower, almost the opposite of Spa's long straights, and it will strip away any excuse about the layout suiting one because more than another. If Ferrari's low-drag gamble genuinely reflects a deeper improvement to the SF26, it should show up there too, in a completely different shape. If it doesn't, then Spa will have been a one-weekend illusion, a car that looked briefly transformed because the track happened to hide its real weaknesses for a few days. Either way, the answer won't stay hidden for long.